Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. When the national security state is given an inch, will it always take much more than a mile? For years, we were routinely told the government does not spy on citizens. Now we know this is not true. We are spied upon in an unbelievably massive way. And it's not just surveillance. Oversight of the intelligence community has been shown to be cavalier. This is also true of torture, kidnapping, detention, assassination by drones, and death squads. Do we need a supercomputer to keep track of the many ways we're deceived? To crosstalk the national security state, I'm joined by Catherine Marr in Washington. She is Director of Strategy and Engagement at the digital rights organization Access and a fellow at the Truman National Security Project. In New York, we have Michael Kelly. He is a defense reporter for Business Insider. And in Philadelphia, we cross to Dave Lindorf. He is an investigative reporter, author of the book, The Case for Impeachment, and a founding editor of the online newspaper, thiscan'tbehappening.net. All right, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Catherine, if I can go to you first in Washington, D.C. When we look at the size of the national security state now, is it manageable, and is there any way we can rein it in, considering all the things we've heard over the last few weeks and months?
I mean, I think that it's really evident that the national security state has grown tremendously in size. If you look at reports from the Washington Post in 2010 about sort of the depth and expansion of that state, and sort of the understanding that the DoD itself doesn't even understand really what it has millions of contractors doing around the world globally. I think there were recent reports about the fact that they couldn't even identify the function of those contractors in Afghanistan for quite a number of them. It seems clear to me that the national security state as a whole is actually well beyond the scope of efficient management. I mean, in terms of what we can do to rein it in, I think that the number one problem that we see is overclassification and secrecy. The discussions that we're having today are very much around the fact that we have secret courts issuing secret opinions that are not available to the American public. And we've heard from numerous senators, including Senators Wyden and Udall, that this is part of the problem and that there's a clear gap in understanding between what sort of these interpretations are and what the American public actually understands them to be.
You know, Dave, if I can go to you in Philadelphia, I mean, this classification thing gives the national security state power, okay? We have information, you don't, okay? And they like it that way.
Well, democracy depends on freedom of information, and we basically don't have that anymore. We're told that anything basically important is too important for us to know. But worse than that, it's even too important for members of Congress to know. And so, and even when they're told it under rules of secrecy that they aren't allowed to tell us. I mean, it was really ridiculous that Senator Wyden said he knew this terrible stuff that Americans would be really go ballistic over if they knew, but he couldn't tell us because he was sworn to secrecy. The problem is there's no courage in Congress, even from people like Senator Wyden, to say, well, wait, I took another oath, and that was to uphold and defend the Constitution, and that takes priority over these silly secrecy oaths. He should have been out a year or two ago when he found out and told us exactly, the American people, what it is that the NSA is doing, what it is that the FBI is doing. But I think even maybe beyond that, a bigger problem, not to do with classification, is that the American people have been suckered into this fear of terrorism that makes people say, oh, well, I'm willing to surrender all of these rights to privacy because I'm so afraid of terrorism. And until the American people wake up and say and demand that this stuff be stopped and that it be opened up, we're really falling into a deep, deep hole with this national security mentality.
Michael, what do you think about that? I mean, it's turned into a huge industry. I mean, it's vast. The budgets are vast. Every organization, every bureaucracy wants more and more and more, and fear sells.
Well, particularly to the NSA, it goes beyond classification and the public and what they know, because the Silicon Valley, the tech companies help build this domestic spying apparatus, or even the global spying apparatus. So the actual hardware and technology is intertwined with private companies. So if you were going to try to rein that in, you're going to have to deal with private companies that share information regularly with intelligence agencies, and they get classified intelligence back. So you have a partnership, a public-private partnership that you would have to get to really the meat of it, even before you decide to, or even after you decide to declassify things and get the American people to wake up.
You know, Catherine, how do you feel about that? I mean, when we have Google and Facebook and all these other companies, I mean, we don't know how willing they were. They claim they weren't, okay? But is this an added facet for you? You know, when we look at from like the Cold War to today, I mean, we have now private companies that are doing the work for the government against us.
Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing here is that if those companies are doing the work for the government, that's really in a passive way. I mean, we are elective consumers of their services. And when we do use those services, there are certain things about our use of those services, like content data, the content of our emails, for example, or our chats, that are implicit or intrinsic functions of the services. And then there's data like metadata, which I think is at the heart of sort of the discussion about the mobile phone concerns with regards to the court order on Verizon, that the systems just leak as a part of the structure of the systems themselves and the way that they transmit information. And that's very hard, in fact, to reveal. Now, we don't actually have any sort of expectation of privacy with regards to metadata because of a 1979 Supreme Court decision with regards to those public consumer records. So I think that, you know, with that understanding and expectation, that's not necessarily something that the companies have tremendous control over. There's actually precedent within sort of the American common law. Now, I think that the problem that we have here is very much around a lack of clarity about what's going on with regards to the companies themselves and whether or not they were indeed compelled, as they would argue, to participate in this program. There's obviously a significant gap between their initial denials that they've never heard of it and their sort of later admissions that, yes, in fact, that they have been gagged under these FISA orders and have been compelled to comply. I think that we've seen a history over the course of the last decade or so of these companies increasingly being drawn into this national security process or this national security state. And with time, these companies have actually made, some of these companies have made efforts to actually reveal the extent to which they're compelled to cooperate. So companies like Google, for example, issue transparency reports. Those transparency reports refer to requests for law enforcement data. Now, we know that those law enforcement requests, they could be sort of local requests, municipal requests, and the like. And they also could include things like FBI national security letter requests, which only recently have these companies have been given permission to actually give very broad understandings of the number of requests that they receive. So between 1 and 1,000, for example, nothing more granular than that. What we're beginning to understand is that in addition to those highly secretive requests, which also included gag orders, these national security letter requests, is that there's this whole additional function underneath FISA that has these very, very broad interpretations of the law that allows for sort of essentially perpetual data gathering. And up until now, it seems as though those companies were legally prohibited from actually revealing that. And so I think that there's tremendous opportunity for us to actually seek clarification around the extent of the company's interaction and really understand better the sort of technical implications and the amount of data that's being revealed. And I think that, you know, we have seen some of the companies come out in a push for that. I think obviously while information is still being sort of gathered and received, lots of questions remain up in the air.
Okay, you know, David, when everyone gets on these social networks, I can remember for years, your privacy is so important to us. You know, Google says that, Facebook says that. It's all nonsense in retrospect, isn't it?
There's so much hypocrisy going on at the private sector and in the government. It's just mind-boggling. I wrote a piece recently talking about just stopping all the BS because there's so much of it. But look, if the companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple and Yahoo and all of these firms that are having this information just vacuumed up really were concerned about it, they would have filed appeals of the FISA court rulings. They never did. The only company I know of that tried to stop this was back in the Bush administration when, well, okay, correct me, but Quest filed a lawsuit against it when AT&T did not, when Verizon did not, and I don't see any evidence of these companies going to court to really try to stop this.
Okay, Catherine.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Catherine, did you want to jump in there?
Actually a report.
Well, I just want.
Go ahead. You want to clarify something?
I just want to note that there were reports. I do just want to note that there were reports that have come out very recently that indicate, and I have, again, a lot of this information is still sort of coming to light, that, for example, with regards to sort of Yahoo's complicity or participation in this FISA scheme, it seems as though they did in fact petition and lost. And so I do think that we really don't know exactly what the extent of sort of the company's pushback on this was. And so I just want to be clear about that. It's not that I'm saying that the companies have done one thing or another. It's just that we don't know.
Dave, go ahead. You want to finish your point? Go ahead.
There's two things there, Catherine. One is that you petition. No, you go into court, you file a lawsuit, and when you lose, you appeal it to the next level. And none of them have done that. These should all be going up to the Supreme Court, and nobody's been pushing this. And the second thing is, to the extent
I would agree with that. They have not gone to the third level of appeal of the FISA court.
No. That's right, and then the next thing is this pathetic joke about our legal system now with regard to national security stuff is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think when you appeal the FISA court, they can keep the appeal secret.
Secret as
There's
well.
all kinds of levels of secrecy that are so absurd.
That's correct. You can appeal to the FISA court, and that's a secret appeal.
All right, hold on. I want to go to Michael before we go to the break. I want to go to Michael. Go ahead, jump in. Jump in, Michael. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to go back to something that Catherine said about common law, that 1979 law. Interesting thing to me is I believe it was 2010, the law that ruled that the government can't put a GPS tracking device on a drug dealer's car. So they're talking about you can't put physical hardware to do surveillance. And that's interesting to me because the AT&T whistleblower Mark Klein and NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake, they both talk about this Israeli-made Naris hardware. And James Banford of Wired had a great report on this in 2010. Naris-made Israeli hardware that they put on the AT&T made wiretapping rooms. So they put the hardware on the cables and split them. So that
I have to jump in here. I'm sorry,
folks.
I have to jump in here. We have to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the national security state. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the national security state. Okay, Catherine, I'd go back to you in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the surveillance in the national security state here. But, when you look at, the Obama administration has decided to arm the rebels in Syria. We had Libya not long ago. I mean, foreign policy, national security policy is really beyond the grips of people, the average people. Nobody votes about it. There's hardly any discussion about it either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really right. If you look at sort of voting trends, what you'll see is that the American public make their decision on very sort of pragmatic considerations around things like economic policy, sort of a consumer confidence, trust and perceptions of trust in public individuals. But foreign policy tends to be very far from the actual discourse and debate. If we do have a conversation on foreign policy, it tends to be around homeland security, as opposed to thinking about the longer-term strategic implications of our interventions overseas or our engagement with the world writ large. I think that, with this surveillance issue, one of the things that we've seen is that U.S. administration and other officials have come out and said, well, don't worry, it's not the American people who are being spied on. In fact, which means that it's, in fact, we're spying on everybody else in the world, which is in direct violation of our role as a signatory to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which is a UN human rights instrument upon which we use to judge other countries with regard to their behavior and human rights, like their respective human rights. And so I think, that's incredibly problematic when we start actually engaging with sort of violations of these universal rights at the global level, at a foreign policy level, in a way that puts us up for a sort of judgment against this dual standard.
Okay. Michael, what do you think about that? Because, I was kind of a child of the Vietnam War, a very small child, okay? But, there was a big national discussion about that war. And I've never seen such a national discussion about war and national security since then, well, with the exception of these recent leaks.
Yeah, since September 11th, 2001, the president, under Article 2 of the Constitution of defending the United States of America, has taken great liberties in doing that, and that umbrella of Article 2 takes into drones, anything that they would like to do in Syria, and surveillance, all of it, and that's not even talking about the covert actions, right. Things that happen in Libya, Syria, and the fact that the NSA is a covert foreign intelligence signals agency. So all this stuff, it was supposed to be secret, and then it just got too big, and you had whistleblowers, you had human beings that said they couldn't take it anymore.
Dave in Philadelphia, you want to jump in on that? I mean, it's just gotten so big that it doesn't even know its own parts anymore. Go ahead.
Well, it is amazing. I mean, I was an activist against the war back in the 60s and had the FBI investigating me. You know, I have an FBI file. I had people telling me they'd been visited by the FBI all over my anti-war activities. Now we have a sort of a fragmented, weakened anti-war movement, and it is actually investigated under the counterterrorism rubric of our national security state. So, I mean, it's unbelievable. So when you oppose the war now, you're considered a terrorist. If you look also at the Occupy movement, that was investigated by the counterterrorism organizations around the country. I forget the terms they used for the unifying of police and private security and the FBI, that they set up about 21 of these centers around the country that were monitoring and harassing and interfering with these demonstrations, which were peaceful, which were legal, and which had permits and everything. There's actually, I mean, it gets so bad that I'm looking at a document right now in which the FBI in Houston talked about a plot to assassinate the leaders of the Occupy movement in Houston, which they sent up to Washington, and there has never been an arrest for that plot. All right, we don't know who it was, but the FBI talked about it very casually in their memo. So, I mean, it could have been the Houston police involved, it could have been the bank security guards involved, but somebody was planning on using sniper rifles, according to the FBI memo, to assassinate these leaders. This is what we're entering into here. It's far beyond what the Church Committee showed in the COINTELPRO investigations from the Nixon era.
Well, Dave, you read my mind. Catherine, do we need a Church Committee? Exactly what my next question was going to be. Is there the political will for it? Go ahead.
I mean, I absolutely think that we need sort of a modern-day church committee. I think it is worth and instructive to note that FISA, actually the legislation being used to justify quite a bit of this surveillance, grew out of the findings of the Church Committee. Now, admittedly, some of the Authorizations Act that Congress voted on in 2012 is really what I think has led to these widespread abuses. But it is worth noting that FISA, this tool that's being used to justify this, is an outcome of the Church Committee. But yeah, this is exactly what we need. What we need is a full congressional inquiry into the extent and scope of this surveillance. We need oversight and control of the National Security Agency and other intelligence gathering agencies, and we need to do this in a public and accountable way. I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that the intel committees in particular tend to hold closed-door hearings that are not available to the public. I mean, many of the staffers of these different senatorial offices don't even have the classification levels to be able to read the documents that their bosses are handling. The degree of secrecy and the lack of information that we have about what is actually going on is completely staggering. We need a committee, we need investigations, we need it to be open to the public, and we need it now. And we need the political willpower to do so. And it's clear that's not coming from the administration. They're perfectly happy supporting these programs in a direct violation of prior statements, and certainly, you know, as someone's made the point earlier with regards to sort of congressional willpower and congressional support, there are certainly people who are dissenting. We haven't yet seen sort of the outrage that I think the American public deserve.
Michael, you know, I think the national security state really likes this Congress because they're quite benign, with the exception of a few voices.
Yeah, and another issue is that Mike Riley of Bloomberg had a great article recently about the public-private partnership and how these companies get swap data for intelligence. And an expert told him that Congress is simply outmatched. Technology has gone so far, so fast, that congressional lawmakers, they get stuck. They don't understand what is actually happening, all the technology that's involved here. So to ask them for oversight is a tall task because they don't even know what they're talking about.
Dave, what do you think about that? Because I would bet you maybe one or two members of Congress read the Patriot Act. The rest of them just voted for it.
Yeah, that's right. But I would point to a show recently. I think it was the 10th on the Daily Show, which is the only news show worth watching anymore. That yours accepted, in which they showed Clapper. They showed Clapper in a hearing lying, flat out lying to Senator Wyden, and nobody is calling him to the carpet. Nobody is filing a contempt citation against him, for lying so blatantly. And until they start doing that, I mean, that used to be sort of de rigueur in these hearings back in the 70s,
yep.
Looking at the abuses in the Nixon administration. Nobody is calling these people to the carpet and demanding that they tell the truth. So the idea of a church committee is almost ludicrous, because we have such, one real risk, I think, is that the security state has gone so far that even if they don't do this, I think that the members of Congress have to be thinking, gee, they know all my phone calls.
That's right.
They're going to dig up all my skeletons if I get too rough on them. And that's, you can laugh, but
we're laughing,
that's
but
a
it's true.
serious concern.
It's true. Catherine, go ahead. I mean, is there such a thing as perjury anymore?
I was just going to say,
is there any concept of perjury anymore in Congress? I've been away for a while.
Beats me. I mean, I love the fact that Freedom Works, which is a right-leaning sort of political action group, called for Lindsey Graham. If he's so okay with secrecy, could he just release his bank details? I mean, just give us all the passwords to his email. But it's a campaign that they're running currently, and I think that that's really fascinating. What you've seen is this uniting the far left and the far right and saying,
yep.
Wait a minute, this is completely unacceptable. This is a bipartisan issue. This is not in any way sort of a thing for political football. This is about the Constitution and constitutional rights. And I think that it's instructive. So I don't remember if it was David or Michael who mentioned earlier, the thing that all of these individuals do is they swear to defend the Constitution first and foremost. That is their oath of office. And it's not about defending the national security state. It's not about defending even the security of the homeland. It's defending the Constitution. And it's clear that these programs are in clear violation of the First and Fourth Amendment. And I feel as though... I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Dave, jump in.
It's not about keeping America safe either. I almost blew my coffee through my nose when in one of the debates President Obama got on and he said, my first responsibility is keeping Americans safe. I said, what? That's not your first responsibility.
No, and then he said, my second responsibility his second responsibility was to defend the Constitution.
Yeah, that's his oath.
He said first America safe and second the Constitution.
That's his oath.
Right. And that's the wrong order.
Okay, Michael, jump in here.
The oath is to defend the Constitution.
Have we forgotten the Constitution in the United States?
Well, it goes to my point of Article 2, the defending the nation. He'll say Article 2 first and the rest of the Constitution later. And that's why I really think that if something occurs here, it's going to happen in the courts. It's a Electronic Frontier Foundation just won a big case in which they got a ruling in which they could, moving forward so that the FISA secret ruling that said that the NSA surveillance violated the Fourth Amendment at least one time, they want to see that, and the court knocked down the DOJ's argument saying that it was secret and said that, well, actually, potentially they can see this. And then the second one is the ACLU. They just sued the DOJ because over this metadata, and they said, well, this leak says that Verizon is giving you hundreds of millions of call records a day. So, and we're a Verizon customer, therefore we have standing. And you're taking this metadata, which violates the First and Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, just collecting it, and then you're taking it to build profiles of everyone that has intimate associations, where you're moving, where you're going, and that is a further intrusion of everyone's freedom.
Okay, we've run out of time. I'm sure NSA has recorded this program, and we'll watch it later. Many thanks to my guests today in Washington, New York, and in Philadelphia. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.
I love you.